What's going on, everybody? It is about 4 o'clock, Thursday, June 13th. And I want to discuss a really sad story that has happened here. And big story in my neck of the woods, which is the Metro Detroit area. It did get some national attention, but not a whole lot. And it would have been a couple years ago. Just give you a quick breakdown of what happened. In May of 2010, a 7-year-old Detroit girl named Aiyana Jones was killed while sleeping on the couch of her home by a Detroit SWAT team raid. Okay, and I want to do a little background. And the reason this is important now is because the officer responsible has just went on trial. Okay, a little background on it. In May 2010, 17-year-old young man named Jerron Blake was walking down the street. Apparently, he gave some scumbag animal named Chauncey Owens a, quote, dirty look. Chauncey Owens, being the tough guy he was, didn't do anything about it. Got on his little moped, drove off, went to his buddy's house. His buddy's name was Charles Jones, okay? He went to Charles and told him about the fatal insult of the so-called dirty look. They loaded up an SUV, went to where the kid was staying or walking down the street where they had last seen him. Chauncey Owens, being the tough guy that he was, had a gun, jumped out, and shot the young man, 17-year-old young man, Jerron Blake, in the chest twice. Killed him dead, okay? Police got the tip that where they were staying, where the two bad guys were staying, Charles Jones and Chauncey Owens, and they proceeded to raid the house the following day, or a day or two afterwards, okay? Now, the police that conducted this raid was the Detroit SRT, which is the Special Response Team. These guys are top of the line, the best trained police officers the city of Detroit has. Okay, these are the top notch of the DPD. These guys are trained to a military level of performance. They're a full-time SWAT team. Unlike most SWAT teams, I believe they were the first full-time SWAT team in the entire country. Unlike most SWAT teams, where the cops go and jump in their SWAT gear when there's a crisis that needs to be addressed, these guys are full-time. That's all they do. They train for these type of situations, all day, every day. That's what they do. That's their job. Okay, so the Detroit SRT are the guys that conducted this raid. The raid itself was filmed by a camera crew from the A&E TV show The First 48. Now, there's a lot of controversy regarding this camera crew because, number one, the powers that be in the Detroit Police Department said this camera crew was not authorized to attend this raid, but they went anyways. Okay, they just showed up there. Obviously, somebody told them where it was and what was going on. Excuse me. They showed up and attended this raid, okay? Number two, one of the producers from The First 48, a woman named Allison Howard, was indicted on perjury and obstruction of justice charges due to apparently some false statements she made regarding the raid and apparently withholding the videotaped evidence when it was demanded by the courts and the prosecutors to go ahead and move forward with this case. So let's get to the raid. Officers show up, the Detroit SRT's officers show up, they're looking for Charles Jones, Aiyana Jones' father, and they're looking for Chauncey Owens. Okay, they show up, conduct the raid. First officer in is a guy named Joseph Weekly. Officer Weekly's the first guy through the door. They throw their flashbang distraction device in. It goes off. He storms in, fires a shot from his submachine gun. The shot he fired strikes a 7-year-old girl who was sleeping on the couch with her grandmother in the head, kills her. Ever since that shot was fired, now just real quick, both of the murder suspects were upstairs in this house. Detroit police did arrest Chauncey Owens and Charles Jones. So that shows you the type of people they are. They don't give a shit that they're wanted for murder. They'll let their children sleep around. They'll hide out in the same house because they're fucking the lowest form of animal on this planet. They're disgusting subhuman pieces of shit. Chauncey Owens, as hardcore criminals normally do, immediately flipped on Charles Jones and said, yeah, he gave me the gun. Chauncey Owens is now doing 28 years in prison. He pled, so he's doing 28 years for the murder of Jerron Blake, 17-year-old young man who did nothing more than look at this piece of shit the wrong way. Cost him his life because the guy's a real tough guy, and instead of doing any things with these, he had to go and get a gun and shoot the guy twice because that's how tough he is, because he's a bitch. Hopefully he's getting fucked every day in prison. I hope his asshole's this big right now. Chauncey Owens, you piece of shit. And Charles Jones, you're another piece of shit. Hopefully, the worst possible diseases afflict you. He's a career criminal, this guy. I'm sure they're probably going to get some money for Aiyana's death. Hopefully, he doesn't see a penny of it. I really truly mean that, because he's a piece of shit career criminal also. Long rap sheet. Anyways, back to the death of the little girl. What's important about this story? The 7-year-old girl was killed. The officer, named Joseph Weekly, testified, and he said right after the fact, she grabbed my gun, she grabbed my gun, she grabbed my gun, talking about the little girl's grandmother, an old lady, 60-some-year-old lady. Let's say, for the sake of argument, she did grab the gun. These are highly trained, the best trained police officers. I'm quite certain that training in weapon retention is a hallmark of their training. And even if that had happened, it would still be unacceptable due to the level of training these guys receive. But unfortunately for Officer Weekly, it doesn't look like that was the case. It doesn't look like any of that really happened. This trial just started a couple days ago, and yesterday, I believe, one of his fellow officers, the guy who was right behind him in line during the raid, I believe he was the 2-man in the house, testified. This has to be hard for him, because these guys have a serious bond. These guys' lives depend on each other. I can't imagine what these other officers are going through testifying against their own bro. It's got to be absolute torture. So the number 2 officer, I can't remember his name, who was in the stack behind Weekly, he said, and during his testimony, he did not see any physical confrontation between Weekly and anybody else. Okay, he did not notice anything like that. Now, he did say, obviously, they had just tossed the flashbang grenade in there, and any of you guys have been around those, they will, they blind you, disorient you. That's their job. They're a distraction device. They're to get you sitting there like looking around, what the fuck's going on, while the good guys come in or the bad guys come in, whoever. So it's not looking good for Officer Weekly. What I would like, but Officer Weekly is sticking to his guns. I mean, obviously this guy was utterly devastated that he took an innocent life. There's no doubt about it. They said after the raid he was upset, he was crying, he was incoherent, he was in shock that he had just taken a life. There's no doubt about it. This was completely an accidental shooting. Absolutely no doubt about it. But when you're a police officer, especially when you're one of these guys, you're held to a much higher standard than an average citizen would be, okay? And that's the sad part here, because not only was a 7-year-old life taken, but a police officer, a career police officer, one of the best that City Detroit has, is no longer on the job. And it's a tough job they do. The SRT goes after the worst animals this city has to offer. The most heartless motherfuckers out there are the ones the SRT goes after. Barricaded gunmen, just the worst pieces of shit on this planet. That's what SRT does. They get those guys. So right now, the trial is progressing, and I don't know how I feel about this. Normally, I would side with city cops because they have a really tough job to do. These guys, especially in Detroit, as of late, it's been a rough couple of years, and these guys have a monstrous job to do, and they do the best they can. Unfortunately, in this situation, I just don't see any possible reason that this guy's gun went off. It doesn't look like the grandmother even laid a hand on him. Nobody can explain why this shot was fired. His fellow cops on his team are saying nobody noticed the physical confrontation. His weapon was inspected by the Michigan State Police and found to be in perfect working order. What I want to know is, what happened? Did he just accidentally pull it? Listen, a weapon does not fire. It's not going to just sit there and go off on its own. You have to pull the trigger. That's the bottom line. You've got to pull that trigger. Otherwise, it's not going to fire. This weapon was not dropped. Even being dropped is probably 1 in a couple 100,000 chance of it going off. The weapon was not dropped. It was in his hands. Apparently, from one of the descriptions I read, when he conducted the raid, he had a shield in one hand. He was the one man. He was the first guy through the door. And he had an MP5 submachine gun in the other hand, which to me seems rather unwieldy, but I'm not a SWAT guy, so I don't know. Maybe that's how they do it. That's how he went in, and somehow, some way, he squeezed off a shot that hit this little girl and killed her. There's no doubting that. There was only 1 round fired. It was from his weapon, and it killed that girl. And I don't see any way around this other than, at the very minimum, him being found guilty of reckless discharge of a firearm, and resulting was the involuntary manslaughter. I don't think he meant to kill that girl. I guarantee you he didn't mean to kill that girl. But she died due to him firing around for whatever reason. Like I said, even, let's say, let me play devil's advocate here. Let's say, for the sake of an argument, that somebody didn't go for his gun. Even if that's the case, it's not acceptable for him to fire off a round. If that had happened, I guarantee you this would never even be a trial. Okay, but it doesn't look like that happened. It really doesn't. It doesn't look like that happened. It looks like he made a tragic, awful mistake after years and years of service and going on many of these raids. He made a mistake, and this one just happened to cost a beautiful little girl, 7-year-old girl, her life. Just like any other victim of any other crime, justice needs to be done. And I hope it is done, unfortunately. I think that after looking at all the facts and everything I've heard, there's just no justification for that shot to have been fired and kill that girl. I'm looking very forward to seeing how this trial turns out. It's really interesting. I do believe they're probably going to convict him, at least on one of the charges. They got to convict him. I don't see any other way this turns out any different. But it's a fascinating trial. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens if a guilty verdict does come back guilty on what counts. So thank you for watching. If you have any comments, leave them. You guys know anything about this story? Tweet me at BoneBrann, BONEBRANN on Twitter. Everybody be safe, man. And my next video coming up is going to be called. It's going to be about the Department of Justice. It's going to be called Department of Injustice, and just the disastrous last 6 years of the Department of Justice under Eric Holder. Just what a complete wash this has been. So I'm going to do a little research, and I'm going to throw my opinion out there, and hey, I really appreciate you guys watching. If you like it, hit that thumbs up for me. Everybody be safe, man. Peace.